Hello, my name is Christopher Aracena, and I'm here interviewing Professor Michael George. And I'm asking him a few questions to help us further understand how to succeed in a math class. In your opinion, what's the best general strategy to succeed in a math course?
That's a very good question, and I would say that there's a number of strategies that are very important, some of which are very obvious. Point number one, you have to go to class. It's especially true, I think, in a math class because if you miss a class, math is built on these various levels. And so if you're missing one of the levels, you come back to class the next time and now they're doing problems and you don't know how to do these problems. It's absolutely essential that you come to class, be on time. Second, focusing in class. That's another very obvious thing, but some professors I think are probably better at holding everyone's attention than others. At times it can be easy, your mind can wander. And so just concentrating on what's happening and thinking about how to do the problems, and if there's space in the class to work on another problem, or in some ways focus on what's happening. I think the most important factor in being successful in a math course is doing the homework. Every class in math class is going to have a homework, whether now, depending whether it's on the computer. We have some computer homework systems that have very good resources. It tells you whether you got it right or wrong, for one thing, and there's a link on the thing that will tell you, give you help on how to do the problem, WebAssign and MathXL. Regardless, homework is how you master the problems, and your grade on the test, or the grade in the class, is ultimately going to be based on how you do on the tests. So on down the line, when I look at my students every semester, the people that have high homework scores are the same people that have high test scores, and all the way down. So it's absolutely the most important aspect of any student's performance in a math class, in my opinion, is the homework.
So what's the best way to study for a math test?
Very good question. I think the answer may not be obvious. For example, looking at your notes. For a lot of classes, maybe there are classes like a history class where you have to memorize a lot of information and you go over and over your notes. In a math course, I don't think that works. I don't think reading over the notes, or for that matter, watching other people do math problems. If your professor may have a review session or he's reviewing problems on the board, that can be useful to help you understand the material. But to succeed on a math exam, you have to show mastery. You have to be able to perform and actually do problems that are new problems that you haven't done before. So the analogy that I often use with my students in explaining this is I say a math test is very much like an athletic championship competition. It's a high-stakes situation. You're under pressure. You have a certain amount of time. You have to perform. But secondly, what is the one thing in an athletic competition that's going to determine how well you play?
You have to practice.
Practice, exactly. So for a math test, the key is practice. Practice doing problems. Practice doing problems doesn't mean just doing a bunch of problems and, okay, look, that one okay. You have to look and see whether you got the answer right. That's another very important thing. Just like if you were practicing for a basketball game and you were taking shots, but you weren't looking to see whether the ball even went in, you wouldn't be able to make the adjustments to make sure that you can make the shot during the game. So my basic strategy that I advocate for my students is to find problems throughout the class, go into your notes, go into the homework, get one sheet that has problems and have a separate sheet that has the answers to the problems, and create for yourself a practice test. Some professors will give you a study guide that already has that. I generally think that that's even not enough problems. You do it the first time, simulate test conditions, actually do it as though it's a real test, and see how you do. Because that's going to tell you how ready you are. You're going to see, okay, I could actually only do half of these problems, and so if I did go in to take the test tomorrow it's not going to go very well. Next comes the even harder part, or the really hard part. Because for the problems that you got wrong, you have to figure out how to do those problems right. You got to take responsibility for yourself to somehow figure it out. Some people can afford to get a tutor to help them with that. It's just like some people go to the gym and they have a personal trainer, someone telling them, you know, do push-ups and get on the Stairmaster or whatever. You may not have that, so you have to take responsibility and say, okay, I know that I'm going to face this kind of problem on the test. I got to make sure that I know how to do it. So you go into the textbook, you go into your notes. There's no shortage of places that you can go to figure it out. You can go to the math lab, or you can go to your professor, go to your colleagues in the class. But figure out how to do those problems. There's going to be explanations somewhere, and then you got to practice it more, right? Then you want to give yourself another practice test and see how you do it this time. The thing about a math class is that what's going to show up on that test is not really going to be all that surprising. You know that you're going to face a certain kind of math problem. It's really up to you to get yourself to the point where you can go in there and do that problem right.
So how can you have the most productive relationship with a professor?
I think that productive relationship is one in which your teacher is helping you learn the material. Now obviously you have to do the work, you have to do the homework, and you have to study, but you want to make sure that that professor is explaining the material to you in a way that you understand it. How can you make sure when you're in the class that your professor is communicating this mathematical information to you in a way that helps you understand it?
You have to voice your questions.
You have to voice your questions, that's exactly right. There's going to be time in any class for everybody that you don't understand what that professor just explained. And that professor is not a perfect person. We all have our flaws, and sometimes we go too fast, and sometimes we don't explain something clearly, and sometimes we assume that our students already know how to do something, and it's an incorrect assumption. So we really rely on our students to help us do a better job. If we are not communicating things clearly, it's your responsibility to help us, to tell us, Professor, you know, I just didn't quite understand that one particular part. Every professor has a different personality. Some professors are going to be more open to questions. Some professors may not want to take so many questions because they might feel as though it breaks up their rhythm, in which case you just have to be very polite when you ask those questions. The key rule there is if you have one question, it is absolutely certain. They did a study on this. It's absolutely like 98% certain that someone else in that class has exactly the same question that you have. So that's the first thing. Your professor is a resource for you to help you learn. So you want to maximize your use of that resource. Another way that you can use that resource is to see your professor after class or in the professor's office hours. We are paid to have office hours. Some of us are at different levels and have different amount of office hours that we're supposed to offer, but that's a time that we're in our office, and we're not supposed to be doing office work. We are there in our office to give help to our students. And if no one shows up, we're just going to be on the internet or doing whatever, chatting with our colleagues. So it's a very useful resource to be able to talk to your professor about the problems. If nothing else, you can go in and say, Professor, I just didn't quite understand this thing. Can you help me? And he may give you some practice problems to work on there. He may try to explain it to you better. But that is, I think, the way you want to look at maximizing the productivity of that relationship. Make that professor produce for you. Use him as a resource, him or her as a resource, and get the most out of your professor.
Great. Thank you.